In the decades following the First World War, Europe found itself the host of a multitude of technological competitions between its major powers to improve upon those that had come about during the war. The most well-known of these would arguably be that of the tank and the fixed-wing aircraft, which had shown themselves to be potent war winners of the modern age. While these two were significant in the modernization of the world's armies, their navies were not far behind in jumping into the waves of modernity. During World War I, many events showed the importance of designs that had come about not long before, most prominently the concept of the battle cruiser, dreadnought battleship, and the aircraft carrier. Following the war, the navies of the world sought to continue development of these vessels, and with this, started an arms race to dominate the waves. Within Europe, it can be argued that the most well-known would be the rebuilding of Germany's navy to compete with that of the British in the 1930s. However, there was another significant one brewing in the Mediterranean between France and Italy. To be more specific, the naval rivalry between Italy and France had not started with the end of the First World War, but had been present ever since the entrance into the Triple Alliance by Italy in 1882. This rivalry would see a multitude of strange designs come about, such as the Italia-class ironclads of the 1880s, which had the most powerful armament in the world, 4 17-inch guns mounted in open barbettes. However, the focus of today's video is a class of 2 ships that would not only be the most advanced of their time in the Regia Marina, but after the war would pioneer a new realm of naval warfare. This is the story of the Duca degli Abruzzi class light cruisers, the ultimate evolution of Italy's condottieri superclass. As opposed to the 19th century, the concept of the cruiser type of surface combatant has been relatively relegated to 2 different types, the light and heavy. This differentiation was further cemented into naval design with the Washington Naval Treaty, which placed restrictions on the amount of different types of ships that the major navies of the world could possess at a given time. The heavy cruiser was a design that originated within the First World War and evolved throughout the interwar period, ultimately becoming a type of ship that has a significant cruising range and speed to act as an independent surface unit with enough firepower to overcome a majority of other warships, bar battleships, and battle cruisers. These ships would often be armed with significant caliber weapons, generally 8-inch or larger, and have heavy belt and deck armor. Light cruisers are very similar, however their history was far more in line as alternatives to the armored cruiser, which itself evolved into the battle cruiser, in that they would have lighter armament and armor to achieve greater speeds. With the Washington Naval Treaty, their characteristics would be further defined as ships with a main caliber of 6.1 inches and lower, with a maximum tonnage of 10,000 tons. While heavy cruisers were meant to act as fast hunters of every weaker type of ship, the light cruiser was more suited for roles that included anti-destroyer action, escorting, scouting, and flotilla leaders, just to name a few. In addition to this, light cruisers were often much more economical and faster to build than heavy cruisers. For the Italian Royal Navy, this fact was one they would capitalize on following the First World War. With the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Mediterranean no longer had 3 navies fighting for dominance, but rather 2 locked into a race to see who could outpace the other in technological feats. In 1926, France achieved a great leap in the race with the commissioning of the first Jaguar-class destroyers, Chacal. Normally, a destroyer class would not be a significant issue, however, it was a combination of this new class and those that would follow that would gain the attention of the Italians. When designing the Jaguars, the French Admiralty decided upon creating a class that was capable of not only protecting battle fleets from smaller boats, but even have enough firepower to engage small cruisers and the speed to either escape or maneuver around them. Chacal was armed with a standard destroyer armament of 5.1 inches, but the following classes would be armed with 5.5-inch cannons. A caliber nearing that of cruisers on a hull capable of 35.5 knots was a formidable foe for nearly any ship, especially if they were in a formation. With this, the Italians got to work on creating a proper response to these new, large destroyers. The task was assigned to Lieutenant General Giuseppe Vian, whose study decided upon a construction of a number of light cruisers. However, the Navy would only authorize 4 units. The order was made in December of 1927 with a royal decree bestowing the ships with the names of Alberto di Giussano, Alberico da Barbiano, Bartolomeo Colleoni, and Giovanni del Bendineri. This class, the Giussano class, would be the very first of what would become the Condottieri superclass of light cruisers. The design rationale of these ships would be to focus on combining speed and armament, largely foregoing any significant armor protection. Their designs would be successful as the Giussanos were capable of an impressive 37 knots, even faster than the destroyers they were responding to. They would be an even greater force due to their armament, which included 4 twin 6-inch turrets as their primary caliber, with 3 twin 100mm gun turrets as their secondaries, with various smaller calibers also available. However, as mentioned earlier, their armor was not as impressive, only a 24mm thick belt, and the thickest being 40mm on the conning tower. In addition to setting a theme with their design, the Giussanos would also start a naming convention. The word condottieri refers to mercenary captains and commanders during the Middle Ages, with the word condottiero originally meaning contractor. Many condottieri would become famous individuals within the Italian states and Europe as a whole, being active from the 12th century to the 19th. 3 more classes of cruisers would be built following the Giussanos, all following the doctrine of great speed and armament at the cost of protection. However, with the 3rd class, Montecuccoli, the Regia Marina would start to gradually improve the protection on the ships. This would continue until the 5th and final class of gondottieris, the Duca degli Abruzzi. These ships would mark a significant deviation from the original design, incorporating studies and lessons learned by the Regia Marina during the late 1920s. The overall rationale for this class was to forego a slight amount of speed for better armament and protection, utilizing concepts from the new Vittorio Veneto class of battleships that were being built at the time. Luigi di Savoy, Duca degli Abruzzi, and Giuseppe Garibaldi were both laid down in 1933, with their names being in honor of Prince Luigi Amadeo, who is a prominent explorer and admiral, and Giuseppe Garibaldi, famed military commander who helped to unify Italy in the 1860s. The following are 3 significant deviations they had from the previous classes. The armor belt on the hull was radically changed to incorporate 2 layers, an outer belt with a thickness of 39mm and an inner cemented style belt with a thickness of 100mm. The turrets would have a thickness of 135mm, the deck 40mm, and the conning tower up to 140mm. While not matching in terms of thickness, this change in armor would give the Abruzzis an effectiveness nearly identical to that of the newest Zara-class heavy cruisers. While not significant in terms of combat capability, the ships also sported a new arrangement and design for their propulsion systems. There would be 8 boilers and 4 turbines. In total, the ships were capable of generating 50,000 horsepower per axle, giving a total of 100,000 horsepower from both shafts. They would reach a maximum speed of 34 knots in testing conditions due to their light displacement and engine power. Along with armor, the second most important change was the armament. Previous classes were armed with 4 twin 6-inch turrets for a total of 8 guns. However, this would be increased to 10 with the Abruzzis through the replacement of 2 turrets with triple mounts. While the ships retained the 6-inch guns, their guns would be of a greater caliber, increasing to 55 instead of 53. They would also receive 2 more secondary 100mm turrets, raising the amount of secondary 100mm cannons to 8. Like previous classes, they would retain a variety of smaller caliber weapons and torpedo tubes. 4 twin 37mm turrets, 4 twin 13.2mm machine guns, and 2 triple-barreled 533mm torpedo tubes. For those interested, the ship was capable of carrying 2,250 shells and 2,450 charges for the 152mm guns, 4,100mm shells, 13,037mm shells, 26,413.2mm rounds, and 12 torpedoes. In addition, the ships would have a different design for their general construction. Their superstructure would have a taller command tower, which itself was separated into 7 sections that would allow all command services for the ship to be housed here. These sections would also have direct communication with the targeting center and other command stations throughout the ship. This design for the tower provided significant protection for the brain of the ship, however, would also leave it open to potential issues were it to be hit by a large caliber shell. There were also changes to the interior of the hull, which incorporated a division into 3 zones that existed in an organization of bottom to top. They would also be equipped with 2 aircraft catapults, which was different from all other Italian ships that were equipped with a single catapult. These changes would make the Abruzzi some of the most modern and formidable light cruisers in the world, capable of significantly more operational autonomy at a relatively small cost of only 3 knots. Both ships would be commissioned in December of 1937 with a total cost of 89,450,000 lire for Abruzzi and 89,750,000 lire for the Garibaldi. At this time, their dimensions were as follows: 187 meters long with a beam of 18.9 meters and a max displacement of 11,761 tons for Abruzzi and 11,350 tons for Garibaldi. These ships were the ultimate evolution of the Italian light cruiser and would have been succeeded by a class based on their characteristics if the war had not occurred. Both ships would join the 8th Naval Division in 1938, with Abruzzi becoming the flagship in 1939. Following the entrance of Italy into the war, the ships would be used for various operations, many being aimed at interrupting British supply convoys. Garibaldi would be deployed in combat for the first time in April of 1939, supporting the landing of troops for the occupation of Albania. For Abruzzi, she would get her first taste of action at the Battle of Calabria, also known as the Battle of Punta Stilo. She would face against British cruisers, however the battle would not result in a tangible outcome for either side. She would also take part in an action to intercept the British convoy codenamed Hats in August of 1940, however the operation would not find much success. For most of the war, the ships would be assigned together and generally were given the treatment similar to that of Japan and the Yamato. They were not used for duties given to less advanced cruisers such as transports or convoy escorts. The two sisters would take part in the Battle of Cape Matapan, also known as the Battle of Gaudo in Italy in March of 1941. While this battle was a significant event in the Mediterranean theater, the two would not have a large role in its events. In 1941, both ships would get their first wounds. In July, Garibaldi was torpedoed by the submarine Upholder, but was able to return to base and be repaired in just 2 months. Abruzzi would also be torpedoed, but had worse luck in that her rudder was jammed to starboard and could not proceed without tow. Neither ship would see significant action after this, however, both would find themselves gaining secondary armament upgrades in the form of additional anti-aircraft weaponry. Abruzzi would also be given a German Fumo 21/39 active search radar in August 1943, of which she lacked previously due to a general lack of search radar used by the Regia Marina. Both ships would sail for Malta in September of 1943 following the armistice with the Allies. However, neither would make sail for Alexandria and instead remain alongside the battleships Andrea Doria, Caio Duilio, and Giulia Cesare in Malta. Now on the side of the Allies, the two sisters would be assigned duties in the Atlantic Ocean to search for German ships, mainly searching for commerce raiders. They would also participate in transport and exercise duties alongside the Allied navies. The sisters would be fortunate enough to survive the war, and especially more fortunate to not have the unfortunate luck of becoming a war prize like the other Italian ships. For instance, the battleship Giulio Cesare and fellow condottieri the Duca d'Aosta, who were given to the Soviets as reparations. As the most modern and intact cruisers remaining in the possession of the Italians, they would be commissioned into the newly formed Marina Militare. Abruzzi conducted 2 special tasks in 1946, transporting the former King Vittorio Emanuele III and later his son King Umberto II to Portugal. The post-war period is when the 2 ships would find themselves having much different futures. Abruzzi would be chosen first for modernization in 1951 and would be completed in 1953. The modernization found her receiving a completely new superstructure and anti-aircraft batteries, which included twin and quad-mounted 40mm guns. In 1954, the former Italian city of Trieste was still under control of a UN mandate, and Abruzzi would remain assigned to the area until the annexation was successful in October 26th of that year. She would participate in multiple other NATO exercises during the 1950s, often holding the distinction of flagship. She would be decommissioned in 1961, but survived long enough to act as a set in the 1962 movie Le Fondamento della Valiente, filling in for the British battleship Valiant. She would ultimately be scrapped 10 years later in 1972. Garibaldi would be the ship whose post-war career was more interesting. Similar to her sister, she would be given various changes after the war ended, including a new air search radar mounted on the aft mast in the early 50s. Another interesting event was the testing of helicopter landing with the AB-47G with a makeshift helicopter pad erected on the aft of the ship. In 1954, her entire career would change as she sailed into La Spezia, leaving her existence as a conventional cruiser of the past and entering a new period of naval technology. But before we go into the history of Garibaldi during the Cold War, though, let's first take a look at World of Warships' representation of the class, simply referred to as the Abruzzi. At first glance, we can infer the period of time in which this model is based off of. The inclusion of the Fumo radar indicates that this is post-August 1943, and the camouflage pattern also matches. In reference to the camouflage, this pattern was originally applied in July of 1942, and in the summer of 1943 was modified to be darker in color. The white portions on the bow and stern were actually supposed to be removed by the order of the unit's and inspectorate's command, but this order was not carried through by the captain of the ship. For the most part, the camouflage pattern is correct except for some areas. On the real ship, the dark stripes on the hull continue onto the turret, however in-game this is portrayed incorrectly. The stripes themselves seem to differ slightly in thickness from the original as well, but they are close enough for it to be almost unnoticeable. Overall, it is a well done job at retaining historical accuracies with only minor mistakes. Taking a look at the ship itself using the website shiptool.st, it can be found that the model has the dimensions of 187 meters length, 18.5 beam, and a tonnage of 11,700. Only slight discrepancies exist between the beam and tonnage, but they are so small that it is negligible. With the model, it can be seen that the superstructure has the correct placement of the rangefinders, bridge decks, and even the inclusion of the anti-air suite situated around the first funnel. Moving more amidships, you can see the class's distinct twin catapults and triple-tube torpedo launchers, as well as the second 100mm twin turret that even has its overhang balcony modeled. For the aft section, the aft mast is correct and the placement of X and Y turrets are where they should be. Looking at the statistics of the weapons, the most glaring inconsistency is that of the main guns having a maximum range of 15.06 kilometers. The real guns had a range of 25.7 kilometers with AP and 24.9 kilometers with HE at their maximum elevation of 45 degrees. The projectile weights of 44.3 kilograms for HE and 50 kilograms for AP are correct to their real statistics, as well as their muzzle velocities of 995 meters a second for HE and 910 meters a second for AP. Looking at the secondary 100mm guns, the maximum range is much different than the real weapons due to the in-game range being 5.6 kilometers instead of 15.24 kilometers at 45 degrees. The muzzle velocity, on the other hand, is correct at 850 meters a second. The SI-270 torpedoes seem to be correct in their range, however, the maximum seen in-game is reflecting the real-life range when the torpedo was traveling at 29 knots. Finally, the anti-aircraft suite appears to be relatively correct due to it being in between the maximum and effective ranges of the real guns, 5,500 meters max and 2,500 meters. Overall, the class seen in-game looks to be relatively accurate and a good representation of the ships and their characteristics, minus the gameplay aspects of lower range and such. While saying that Garibaldi was stepping into the future might sound like a metaphor, it is describing what actually happened to the ship. In the years following the Second World War, just like those after the First, new technologies were being tested and adapted into the militaries of this new modern world. The war brought about weapons, vehicles, and equipment unlike anything before that forced the newly established world powers to adapt quickly. One of the most significant was the development of jet aircraft, which in the 1950s had become fast enough to make anti-aircraft systems of the 40s completely obsolete. Italy, emerging from the war relatively unscathed in terms of their navy, unlike their former allies, remained one of the predominant navies in the defense of the Mediterranean and were exceptionally aware of the threat posed by aircraft. Within this region, the time from takeoff to target is very low from nearly every direction, and as such, it was decided that naval units should have sufficient capability of defending themselves in case the Air Force was incapable. The issue at hand was then how to go about protecting these ships, as the old solution of rapid-fire cannons and machine guns could not defend against a missile launched from miles away. With this, the Italians looked towards the developments made by the United States towards the surface-to-air missile. In 1953, the first test launch of the RIM-2 Terrier was conducted from the battleship Mississippi, and this system would later be deployed on cruisers a few years later. Some of these were conversions of World War II-era cruisers, such as the Boston and the Cleveland class. The Italian Admiralty decided upon a plan. Garibaldi would become their first missile cruiser. While at La Spezia, the entirety of the ship would be demolished and removed until only the hull remained. Upon emerging from reconstruction at the end of 1961, she looked like a completely different ship. Starting from the bow, the first noticeable change was the fact that her original 6-inch gun batteries were replaced with smaller twin turrets armed with 5.3-inch guns. Just aft of the B turret was her radically altered superstructure, which now sported a new wheelhouse and upper open bridge. Also apparent is the new incorporation of new targeting systems, including the fire control directly above the open bridge for the guns. The two forward radar systems are the AN/SPS-6 2D scanning radar, and on top of the forward mast, the AN/SPS-39 3D scanning radar. Moving to amidships, her secondary armament no longer consisted of various caliber weapons, but rather 4 Otto Melara 76 Allegato rapid-fire guns on either side. She also no longer possessed 2 funnels, but rather one large center one. Now to the most interesting part, the aft section. Behind the new Selenia Argos 5000 2D radar was what made Garibaldi special, the incorporation of the previously mentioned RIM-2 Terrier system. Situated on top of a massive magazine, the SAM had a sufficient firing arc to engage incoming air threats from nearly any angle. Interestingly enough, she was also protected against mines through the usage of a system that reduced her magnetic profile. For the crew, she was equipped with a system capable of providing radiation measurements and providing pressurization to protect the crew. For crew comfort, the ship was given 4 distilling evaporators capable of producing 20,000 liters of water per day and 3 air conditioners. With these weapons, Garibaldi truly accomplished the goals of the Italian Navy to create a ship capable of defending itself from nearly all forms of aerial attack. The large Selenia radar would provide the ship with a detection range of up to 500 kilometers. the SPS-39 a range of 300 kilometers, and finally the SPS-6 with up to 260 kilometers. All information would be relayed to the newly developed Combat Information Center within the ship to identify threats and prepare defenses. Once the target was identified, the Terrier system used the two AN/SPG-55 radars to guide the missile to a range of up to 32 kilometers. Where the launcher could not see, the forward guns were supposed to engage and in combination create a 360-degree arc of protection. Upon her recommissioning in 1961, she was essentially a completely new ship. In addition to becoming the new flagship of the Italian Navy, she also became the very first missile cruiser in Europe. In September of 1962, she would perform her first firing test of the Terrier off the coast of Puerto Rico, marking not only a historical event for the Italian Navy, but for the history of European cruisers as a whole. However, this would not be the only first achieved by Garibaldi. If you take another look at the aft section of the ship, you will notice a strange set of protrusions with round caps below the Terrier launcher. These were launchers not meant to fire missiles that intercept aircraft, but rather those capable of removing a city from the map. You heard this correctly. Garibaldi was not only designed to fire anti-aircraft missiles, but also was the first surface ship in the world capable of holding and firing ballistic missiles. In addition to wanting protection from aerial threats in the Mediterranean, the Italian Navy also wanted the ability to provide strike capabilities in their NATO defense role. When they conducted their own studies, they concluded that a submarine launch system would not be feasible due to the need for guidance and launch systems, and that this would only work on a surface ship. In the case of Garibaldi, she was able to accommodate the firing system with only a minimal amount of extra weight and would be able to be a stable launch platform at sea. The original plan was to acquire Polaris submarine launch ballistic missiles, which the system did test with dummy missiles. However, the United States never went through with the transfer. With this, Italy instead decided to create its own missile. Compared to other former Axis nations, Italy was truly unique when it came to their military. Not only did they retain a good amount of their ships and were allowed to quickly modernize their force, but in the 1960s they were the only ones to pursue a nuclear weapons program. This was started in response to their surrounding neighbors having programs of their own, including Yugoslavia and Switzerland. When it was apparent that the United States would not be the nuclear deterrent that they sought, focus was then set on developing the Alpha missile. The Alpha was a project conducted by a cooperative effort between Selenia, BPD Spazio, and Aeritalia. It was similar in dimensions to Polaris, however slightly smaller. The project had progressed enough to include several test flights in which inert missiles were fired and were reported to have been successful. Had the missile been completed and put into service, it would have given the Garibaldi a range of 1,600 kilometers, enough to target nearly the entire European portion of the Soviet Union from the Adriatic Sea. Due to pressure from the United States, the program was cancelled and Italy signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1975. Alphas still exist to this day, with one being seen at the Italian Air Force Museum on Lake Brecciano. However, it is not known if it still remains there. Giuseppe Garibaldi was a significant achievement in the history of the Italian Navy and for cruisers as a whole, but she would not have a particularly long career and would find herself decommissioned in 1972 and unfortunately scrapped in 1976. While the Italian Navy has seen itself be the butt of many jokes when it comes to their presence in World War II, it cannot be denied that they produced some of the most advanced ships in Europe. Looking at the Abruzzis, they were an exceptional example of this. A modern design that mixed heavy armament, armor, and high speed made these ships formidable opponents to any enemy ship other than a battleship. While Abruzzi would not have an eventful career, her sister would go on to make history with her revolutionary modernization in the late 50s and almost go so far as providing Italy with its first nuclear launch platform. With their advanced designs and fortune of surviving the war, these two sisters embodied all the lessons learned from previous classes and gallantly held the position of the last of the commanders. What do you think of these ships? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to drop your suggestions for future topics as well. I want to thank all of you for your support of this channel so far, and remind you to make sure you're subscribed and have notifications enabled so you won't miss the next video. It's a bit of a lofty goal, but I'd love to see this channel hit 100,000 subs by the end of 2025, and we can only reach that with your help. That's all I have for you today though, so check out one of the other videos popping up on your screen now, or if you've already seen all the videos, I hope to see you on the next one.